Welcome to the 401k Audit CPA Success Show, where we're 100% focused on helping companies across the United States prepare for their 401k audit. If you have 100 eligible participants in your 401k plan, then this podcast is for you.
Welcome, everyone, to the 401k Plan Audit CPA Success Show and this month's podcast. I'm Kim Moore, Audit Director here at Anders CPAs and Advisors, working on the 401k Plan Audit team. I'm joined with Karen Hill, Audit Manager here at Anders, and this month we are going to talk about cybersecurity and 401k plans. We've talked about this before, but it's an area that the Department of Labor is very concerned about. And I also wanted to throw in some new things that you've probably heard about on the news, artificial intelligence and some things that are going on in that space. So let's first talk about, I am a plan sponsor, let's assume. If you are watching this podcast, you're probably a plan sponsor or plan trustee, or maybe someone with administrative responsibility for the plan. So Karen, I outsource all of my work to my service provider, like a Fidelity or a Vanguard or ADP or a insurance company. So why do I care about this? Isn't that their problem?
No, it's not. It's your problem. A lot of the controls are at the service providers, but ultimately you have the fiduciary responsibility over the plan. That means that you have the responsibility for the controls. You can't just say, well, they have the controls. You have to actually look at the controls that they have and make sure that they're adequate. There's usually in their SOC reports, there's going to be complementary user entity controls, which you need to make sure that you're following for them. And really the reason for this is there's a lot of money in these plans. Even the smaller plans are going to have a significant amount of money for somebody who might want to try to commit fraud and get some money out of your plan. This is it's really a big issue right now.
It's we always talk about that the fraudster, they can try 500 times to commit a fraud and not be successful, but they will not be caught because all of this is done online usually, and they only have to be successful once and they can get a whole lot of money. So it's you have to prevent it every single time, but they only have to be successful once. It's kind of just like terrorism or anything else. So it's it's a big deal, but it's also a big risk if anything happens. And a lot of the plan administrators, plan trustees, and the folks that work with the plan from the company don't understand that they are legally named fiduciaries to the plan and to the participants. They are responsible for making sure that the money in that 401k plan is secure, it's managed well, that whatever the participant instructions are, that they're followed, whether that's something they're doing and taking care of, or you may hire 200, 300 different service providers to help you with that. It doesn't matter. You're still legally responsible. And if there was a breach and there was a lot of money lost, you could be personally liable for whatever that money is. So just think of, you're going along your day-to-day, think everything's fine. Participant calls you up and says, hey, where's my money? And they had $500,000 in their account. I mean, I don't think many of us would want to try to fork over $500,000 to make that person whole. That's we don't have savings to account for that. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit later here. But those are big reasons why we need to care about this. And I think most of us have heard in the news, cybersecurity doesn't impact just 401k plans. It can happen on almost anything, but it's certainly anytime there's money sitting somewhere, that's a big target for a potential fraudster. Another thing I wanted to bring up that we didn't talk about last time we brought this issue up is artificial intelligence. That's been getting a lot of traction in the news lately. Artificial intelligence is where you have a computer or a program, and it's programmed to do certain things, and programmed to learn from itself. So it's going to get smarter and smarter as time goes on. And this has kind of been happening all along. It's getting a lot of attention now, but it's been going on for quite a while. But they have artificial intelligence abilities now that can mimic your voice. So someone could take this recording, try to copy my voice and do something with it, and it would sound, you wouldn't be able to tell. If you knew me, it would sound just like, I had physically called you, or I was doing a video chat with you and saying things that I wouldn't normally say. So they've done a lot of tests, and they've shown the news anchors, and you would swear it was that person talking, even though they didn't record it. They had never said those words, but the artificial intelligence can do that now. So, we want you to kind of think about this in regard to your participants. So obviously, the way a fraudster is going to, there's two ways that they can hurt your plan. One is they can impersonate, if you will, a participant and take a distribution. So I'm going to impersonate Karen. I'm going to go to your service provider. I'm going to say I'm Karen. I want to take money out of my account because I'm Karen and I'm allowed to do that. The service provider doesn't catch it. They allow that distribution to go through. Maybe I change the address, or I tell them to put it into this bank account, which is obviously not Karen's. It's one that I've set up. And I would steal Karen's money. So that's one way to do it. Another way is to hack in and to get a hold of information that then I can use, either sell the information or I can use the information to commit a fraud. Now, we're not going to talk so much about the second part of that. We're going to focus primarily on the first part, and that's someone getting a hold of funds that belong to one of your participants. And obviously, if they were to do that, commit the fraud, your company and the plan would be personally liable and liable as an entity to make that individual whole. Not only if the person, let's say you had $50,000 in your account, Karen, I stole it. It's not just the $50,000 you would have to replace. It would be all of the money I spent trying to recover the money, also any lost earnings, because it might not be discovered for a year, 2 years down the road. Well, that $50,000 would have been invested. It might now be $75,000, and so you would have to replace the full amount that would be calculated and would be lost. And I'm sure a lot of people sitting here listening are like, yeah, well, that could all happen, but probably would never happen. It's probably not a risk to me. That's never really happened. They've just been watching the news. And actually, it has happened. There have been court cases. People have gone to court. They have lost their entire savings that they had in their retirement plan through a scheme just like this. And they've, in the court case, have alleged that their company that this plan was sponsored by either did not have strong enough controls to prevent this from happening, or they didn't supervise the service provider enough to know that the service provider didn't have strong enough controls. And those court cases have all been successful. They're all winning. And so those companies then are forced to make those people whole. They have to fund whatever the judge at that point determines was lost, which of course it's out of your control. The judge could say, hey, it was a $50,000 account, but I think you need to fund $500,000, and you're stuck. It's a court case, so at that point you've got to fund it. And it a lot of times isn't one person. A lot of times it can be multiple participants get impacted. So it's not 50,000, it's 50,000 times 10. You can be getting up into some large dollar amounts here that we're talking about. So it is definitely an issue, definitely something you need to worry about. We know that you want to do the right thing for your employees, and you're helping your employees to save for their eventual hopeful retirement at some point by sponsoring a 401k plan. I'm sure you don't want all that to just be wasted because of a fraudster getting a hold of it. So that all alone should make you pay attention to what we're going to talk about next. But I also have been at 2 conferences within the last couple of weeks here, and speakers from the Department of Labor, pretty high up in that organization, have all stressed that this is a big concern of the Department of Labor for the very same reason. They're charged with helping the citizens of this country save for retirement and protecting benefit plans that companies sponsor. So obviously for the same reasons they're concerned. But they also, to try to combat this, are focusing at the employer level on what can the employer do to help stop this from occurring. One of the things that I heard is that if the DOL is coming into your company or your plan, might have nothing to do with cybersecurity. They're looking at late contributions, or they're just doing a random audit, or maybe someone's complained about something, maybe fees or something. Again, has nothing to do with cybersecurity. They said it's always at the top of their list to say, what policies and procedures do you have in place regarding protection for your employees related to cybersecurity? And if the employer comes back and says, hey, not a risk, we don't care, you're probably going to get a fine. You're probably going to get additional visits from the Department of Labor. So it's high on their list. It's not something in passing that they're involved in, not something that once a breach occurs that they're going to get involved. They're trying to be more preventative. So real big focus on them. We're trying to get the information out to all of our clients as well as anyone listening here. This is something you need to pay attention to. And we're going to talk next about some things that you can do. So Kieran, I got their attention, and they know I use a provider. Again, we mentioned some of the big ones out there, but I don't know. I use, let's say, John Hancock, or I use Fidelity. I don't know what their policy and procedure. I mean, I don't. Are they good? Are they bad? I don't know. So what can I do as a plan sponsor to check with those major providers on what controls they have in place?
Well, first, you can ask them if they've had a breach. They should tell you if they have a breach, but also you can go ahead and ask if they had a breach, and if they did, how did it impact their systems? Did it affect your plan? If they haven't had a breach, then you might want to ask them what their policies and procedures are in that area. What steps that they would take if there was some sort of security breach? You know, how would they notify you? Um, yeah, another reason for that is because with all with all of the different types of fraudsters that are out there, it's possible that they could try to use something like that to gain some sort of access. Oh, we've had a breach here. Click this link, and then some there's something else just going on. So you would want to ask them, how are you going to notify me if there is a breach? Are you going to email me? Are you going to send me a letter? Am I getting a phone call? Probably not a phone call, but what's going to be the
Mm-hmm.
procedure as far as that is concerned? Um, you want to review the controls on how you would prevent a loss. Um, there's different points of access that you would want to look at. You want to look at, your own internal controls. You want to look at the controls of the record keeper. You want to look at the controls of the payroll system, and you want to look at things that are, online. If you have things hard copies, because those hard copies, if you don't have good strict controls around those can get out, and those can be used for cybersecurity attacks.
Yeah.
I mean, think about this.
Oh, go ahead.
I mean, well, I was just gonna say, think about how many times if you are ever on Facebook where somebody will pose some sort of a question that seems innocuous, but it's things like, oh, you know, things that they ask. Well, what was what street did you live on when you were growing up? That often is a security question and answer. So they're trying,
Mm-hmm.
that's a way to get the answer. So,
Or they'll just look on your social media. You may talk about, your best friend that you had back in high school, or where you went to high school, or where your parents, grew up. Those are all security questions too. So these fraudsters,
mhm,
they're very, very smart, and especially with the artificial intelligence now too, those systems can go probe around and find information about an individual. And then, like I said, they can try 500 times, and if it doesn't work, they're not out anything. And especially if it's a system doing it, turn it on, let it
mhm.
go, and if it finds something, great. If it doesn't, I'll try somebody else. So the other thing I was going to mention, you mentioned the paper copies of things. And that could be everything from a paper I-9, which is going to have someone's social security number, their name, their address, all that kind of stuff. It could be paper payroll reports. It could be forms that you use for someone to sign up for something. It could be payroll forms that you're documenting someone's pay increase. I mean, there's all kinds of paper stuff. And you probably have a document
Mhm.
retention plan, and so that hits that limit and you're going to get rid of the documents. We all know you don't shred that stuff. You don't take care of it. You don't lock it up in between taking it out of your company to wherever it's going to get shredded. That's a huge
Mhm.
hole if you're not careful about the custody of those paper records.
Mhm.
That's a fraudster, gold mine. If they could get a hold of one batch of that stuff, they could steal millions. And that exposes not only your 401k plan, but it exposes the finances of your employees as individuals. It could expose your company. It could expose senior
Right.
management. I mean, how would you feel if the owner or the CEO or president or whatever your company had a breach because you didn't watch over some stuff you were shredding? I mean, you'd probably lose your job, but probably you'd also feel horrible about it. So those are all
Mhm.
things that you've got to be careful about and really look at. And one of the things I think, Karen, that you're kind of alluding to, and this is something the Department of Labor was very big on, is a risk assessment of all of these controls related to the data and the protection of the assets as well in your 401k plan. So to do a risk assessment, it doesn't take a lot of time. You don't got to go hire somebody to do it. Take the people that work with the plan, the people in your payroll HR area, maybe some finance folks, because a lot of this gets into financial controls, and just schedule some time. A couple of hours is probably sufficient, and sit down and say, if I wanted to either steal information or I wanted to steal assets from the plan, I wanted to impersonate a participant, how would I do it? Just think like you're a fraudster. Now, we're not all experts, and you're probably not going to think of everything. But if you go through that exercise and you document it and then you do something about any holes that you find, you're a long way towards being able to satisfy when the DOL comes in and asks, hey, what have you done? You can say, well, here, I did this, I looked at this, we changed these things. Is it going to be perfect? Probably not. They're going to catch everything? Probably not. But at least you've made a good faith effort. That will go a long way to protecting the assets, protecting your participants. It will also protect you in the event something goes wrong and there's a lawsuit. You're going to come out much better if you can say, I knew this was an area of risk. I did things. Now, maybe it wasn't foolproof, but at least I did take action and I tried, and that will really help you. So there's, if you just Google risk assessment, I think even if you do Google risk assessment for 401k plans, you're going to find things out there that you can use if this is all brand new to you. There's also, if you want to kind of dive into this a little further, the DOL has a booklet now on cybersecurity, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the things to consider here, but it will actually lay out processes to use in each of these areas. So that risk assessment is going to go into it a little bit deeper dive, what they're expecting, things to consider. So you don't have to hire somebody or be an expert here. You can go get some resources from the Department of Labor. Like I said, big hot button issue, so always go check out the Department of Labor website about cybersecurity, and you'll find a lot of, I think, great resources there. Karen, you want to talk about the SOC reports for our service providers? We haven't talked about that in a lot of detail.
Yes. Well, most service providers will have a SOC report, which simply is they had an auditor come in and evaluate their system of controls or the controls around around their operating systems, and they will do so many tests, and the tests depend on what the control is and what type it is. And then if they have any exceptions to those controls where they found that there was some sort of I don't want to use the word breach, but if the control wasn't working properly, one of the ones that we more common ones that we see is that they were supposed to have a review and the review wasn't performed timely. Sometimes they have terminated employees that they don't remove their access timely, things like that. You want to look at those exceptions, and then you want to look at, there's always a management response to the exception. So maybe you say, oh, well, in a list of 40 terminated users, their access wasn't removed timely. So what was the management response? Hopefully the management response has something to the effect of, well, we looked at these users and made sure that they didn't, after the termination date, they didn't get into the system and use their passwords, use their access and do anything. So you want to see what the management response was, and that will help let you know how seriously the provider takes their controls, and to see if they are really trying to make sure that they don't have any of any of these breaches
Right,
with the
right.
controls.
Serious issues, that the holes, really.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yes.
a best practice would be, those are issued usually annually, can be different, but usually we see them annually.
Mhm.
A best practice would be, have know when they're coming out, so know when they're available. Absolutely, you can get copies of them. You don't have to pay for them, or do a separate
Nope.
request. They're usually right out there on the website. If you have an auditor, you can ask the auditor, because the auditor is going to be all over getting a copy of those and looking at them, so you can have a discussion with the auditor. But if you don't need an audit, you can just ask whoever your rep is. They'll get you a copy. A lot of times your investment advisors are pretty savvy on controls, so they could help you if you don't really understand what's included in there, or go talk to your finance department. A lot of times they're a little bit more cognizant on controls, and understanding what the verbiage means. If you have an internal audit department, they will absolutely be able to help you. They're very familiar with these kinds of reports. So those are all things. But like I said, best practice is to get those annually, take a look at them, see, were there any issues noted? And as Karen said, what did they do about it? What's the management response? And you'll probably see most of it's fine, and then maybe they had a couple of issues, and they took care of them. And so there's nothing there to worry about. But again, I think just showing that we had this meeting, we took a look at it, nothing of concern, we've documented that, that's going to go a long way to showing that you have a good program to try to protect your participants. So those are always good things for you to be concerned about. Another area I wanted to bring up, I mentioned in the risk assessment that you want to think about, if I was a fraudster, how would I commit a fraud? One way is to impersonate one of my participants. So you want to think about, that's probably not going to be someone impersonating one of your employees to you, because in most cases the company that sponsors the plan doesn't hold the assets. So they can impersonate all day long, but I can't issue you a check out of the plan because I don't control those assets. That's a custodial group that is doing that. So they're not going to probably do it with you. They're going to do it with those record keepers, and they're going to try to find a way to either log on, guessing the password, and then using that information they gained off of social media to guess your security questions, or they might do it via a voice response type thing. I call in and I impersonate the participant. I use a 1-800 number voice response where you would call in as a participant and say, I'm Karen Hill, I'm participant number blah, blah, blah. I want to change my investment from investment A to investment B. You leave the recording, the service provider picks that up, they'll go do the transaction, and then they'll probably send you a confirmation via email or a snail mail confirmation. That's what it's for. But if you are successful in impersonating that participant, then you could potentially request a distribution or move some funds around to make it easier to request a distribution. Those are all things that a fraudster could do to impersonate one of your participants and get access to the money. There's something called Know Your Customer controls. Financial entities are required to have policies in this area. It started with banks, so that banks were required via federal legislation to know their customer to make sure that they were taking money not from terrorists and things like that. But it has spread, and so most financial entities now will have know your customer policies and procedures. That's why if you call your bank, your credit union, and your insurance company, any of those entities that has to do with your financial information. They're not just going to say, oh, you're Karen Hill. Okay, what do you want? They're going to ask you things like your social security number, a PIN number, those security questions, other it depends. They all have different things, but they're going to have some protocol set up. And if you can't get them that information, that you're verifying who you are, it doesn't matter who you could really be the person, but they're not gonna take any action um, from that person that's on the phone or is logging on. So if you've tried to log on, you've got your password and you can't give the security questions, it'll lock you up, and your ID will be will be invalid now, and then you've got to go through a process to get it reset. That's why those are there, is to protect against this kind of fraudster activity. So those are very strong preventative controls, and you really want the preventative controls. You don't want to have detective that, well, now I found out a fraudster got in and stole a bunch of money, so I was notified, but now it's too late because the money is always gone in those situations. So you want the preventative type controls. If you don't know what those are, I think it's a very good idea to ask your provider. They probably have a booklet they can give you. I just saw on ADP, if you're using ADP as your record keeper, they have a little booklet now that talks about all the cybersecurity risks, what they're doing, which I'm not sure is a great idea because they're putting out all the procedures, but it is available. And so if you go on your plan's website, you can see that. It's prominently displayed out there. But if you don't know, call and ask your rep. Say, hey, identify yourself as your plan administrator and you're concerned in this area. So ask, what are their know your customer controls? What are their policies and procedures? And they should be able to help you understand that. If you don't have that, just think about if you were to log in or call in as a participant, what do you have to go through? You're going to see those controls because they're going to be right there as you're trying to log in. Um, if they can't answer those questions or they're not willing to talk to you about it at all, it's probably time to consider looking for somebody else, because that means that they know that their procedures are probably not very good. And is that a place you want to have your own money? Because you probably have money in the 401k plan as well, and you're just as likely to be impacted by this as one of your participants. So definitely an area I would check out. And if you don't get a good response, um, you know, I would question that with your service provider, and whether you really want to stay there. Um, we've talked on past blog posts and podcasts about IT general controls, things like strong IDs, strong passwords, backup procedures. I don't want to go into those and spend a whole bunch of time on those because we've kind of covered that before. If you have questions about that, by all means, you can take a look at some of our previous podcasts. But definitely something that you want to check out and be concerned over. Those are areas of weakness too, even inside your company, that can impact more than the 401k plan. So you want to be careful about that. Um, Karen, I know we talked about preventative controls are the best, but
Hmm.
things happen. You can have the best controls in the world, and there's still going to be opportunities. So if I'm a plan sponsor and I want to kind of put some detective controls, I want to look for things, what kinds of things should I consider?
Um, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get to the right spot here.
It's down under like distributions.
Yeah, it's okay. That's why I was going to make sure. Well, the one thing that you could do, and I can tell you from my 20 plus years of auditing experience, it doesn't happen very often. But one of the things you could do is to review the distributions. Review them monthly, review them quarterly, and look and see if there's anything in there that looks odd. Here it's so and so took a termination distribution, but they're still employed. What happened there? Why did that happen? That might be, a red flag that somebody was able to get into the plan and and take some money out of your plan. You just if that happens, you might want to talk to the employee and make sure, if you're not sure what happened with that. And even though you might be hesitant to alarm the employee, it is their money. So
Hmm.
if something happened to their money, they're going to need to know about it, because they're going to find out one way or the
Right.
other, and they're going to be angry either way, and it's going to be less upsetting to them that to know that you found it and you're going to try to help them fix the problem than they find it down the road when you know they go to take out the money and say, "Oh, what happened? What happened to all the money that was in my account?" And then they come to you.
Right.
Um, so
Yeah, and you
either
you bring up a good point, Karen. I mean, there's preventative and detective controls potentially there, because a best practice, again, like you said, we don't see it very often, would be to review the distribution before it's processed. So in that case, I'm
yes,
looking at this person that still works for me. I just saw them down the hall, and they just took a termination. They're requesting a termination distribution. Number one, that's a problem. That's a compliance issue, but also it could potentially be a fraud. Or somebody is applying for a hardship distribution. They need to pay medical bills, and they haven't been sick. They've been working overtime, for a lot. So that
mhm,
might be, I'm not sure about
yeah,
that. Those kinds of things. I'm applying for a hardship because I'm buying a new home, and that, you just talk to them, and that's not on their radar. So that's something you could catch ahead. You could stop it before it happens. But if that's, just not feasible, or, you've chosen not to do that, most plans have reports out there that you can look after the fact. Again, not the best, but at least, as Karen mentioned, you can catch it kind of before it gets blown up, and you might be able to catch it that it happened once before it happens, multiple times, and now you've got, a big, huge problem. Um, the other thing, ultimately, so you've tried to do your risk assessment, you've tried to look at controls, you've put preventative controls in place, you thought they were great, you're looking after the fact, and lo and behold, either you see that there has been a distribution that was not intended, you're involved in a lawsuit, so now you found out there's a breach, or potentially the record keeper or the custodian comes to you and says, "We were notified that we've had a breach." Not, and at that point, they probably don't know it impacted you or not, but that you've notified. So obviously, at that point, you're going to probably panic and say, "Oh my gosh, now what do I do?" Um, One of the things that can help you out, and the DOL stress this a lot, is insurance coverage. So, obviously you can't go get the coverage once the breach has happened. You're going to have the coverage ahead of time. That's how insurance works. So, if you take away nothing else from this call, it's probably a good idea to call your insurance broker and talk about general cybersecurity coverage, because this could impact your company, could impact your employees, your data on your employees as well. It's not just a 401k plan issue. Obviously, this could be a more general issue. And depending on your company, if you do a lot on the internet or a lot of transactions through the internet, it could be even a bigger issue for you as a company. So there are all kinds of policies out there. Now, again, not going to go into a lot of depth on the different policies that are out there, but all different kinds of cybersecurity, um, reimbursement, coverage if you're in a lawsuit, those kinds of things. It depends on how much you want to pay for it. Depends on how much risk you think there is here. Like I said, that's between you and your insurance broker, but strongly would encourage you to check that out. I don't think those policies are all that expensive at a base level, but again, depends on which option you pick, and are you getting a bigger policy, smaller one, all of that. So it kind of depends. The other thing I'd say is that 401k plans, we've talked about this before, they are required to have an ERISA fidelity bond. That would not help you here. So we've talked about that in other podcasts, talked about in blog posts. You are required to have that. That's covering the funds as it's kind of going through the process. So you've taken $100 out of someone's paycheck and it's going through a process to get over to their account in Fidelity. In between there, something happens, say that the payroll person steals the $100. Those bonds will help with that. It is not going to help with this type of cybersecurity fraudster type action. So, if you're hearing this and saying, hey, I already got a bond, I got a policy, covers the plan, I'm good. Probably not. So those are different types of policies. They're covering different risks, covering different people. So I'd just be careful about that. And I would, check that out and actually talk to your insurance broker, because they're going to be the experts here to be able to help you make sure you get the right kind of coverage for the risk that you want to try to mitigate. So my last thoughts on this topic: do something. Don't just listen to this and say, yeah, that's going to happen to somebody else. I don't, I think the risk is low. I don't need to worry about it. As we said, big, huge risk. If it happens, it could be a disaster for your company, for yourself, and definitely for your employees. But if nothing else, you want to have a response when the Department of Labor calls and asks. And it would not surprise me if they start randomly picking companies and asking them to respond to this risk, and what have you done as a plan sponsor to protect your participants from this risk, especially with all this artificial intelligence stuff coming out. It's, I think, going to only get worse. I think it's going to be an even bigger area of risk. So definitely do something. Look at the insurance coverage, do the risk assessment, review the SOC report, do some documentation, talk about it, but document something so that you can show that this is an area you understand, you're concerned, you're trying to do your best. That would be my best suggestion. I don't know, Karen, what are your final thoughts here?
Well, one thing I would want to emphasize is that if you do have cybersecurity insurance for the company, make sure it covers the plan as well,
Yeah, good point.
because it might not. So you want to make sure that any kind of insurance coverage you have for those types of things will cover the plan.
Yeah, very good point.
Ugh.
Last thing I'm going to do before we wrap up for today, as we do every month when we do these podcasts, we'd love to hear from our listeners. So if you have any questions, you have suggestions for future podcasts, areas that you'd like us to cover, just questions on what we talked about, you need access to the DOL kind of booklets that I mentioned, don't hesitate to reach out. I'll give you my personal email. It's the letter K, then MOORE at Anders with an S, CPA.com. Again, it's KMOORE at ANDERS CPA.com. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about this topic or other suggested topics, or if you happen to need a 401k plan audit or want to talk about an issue that's come up in your 401k plan audit, be happy to help with that as well. With that, I think we're going to end today's podcast and let you get working on all those things that we talked about. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, we will talk to you again next month in the 401k Audit Success Show podcast. Thanks for listening.
Enjoy this podcast? Visit our website at anderscpa.com/401k to get more tips and strategies for achieving 401k audit success. We're here to be a resource with ever-changing rules and regulations.